Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called All Systems Science University. Can we keep it? Written by apophis-pegasus. Absolutely not. Please, why not? The All Systems Science University headmaster whirled around from his irate pacing in the university wormhole laboratory to glare at the eager faces of his new human students, fresh from Earth on an experimental education transfer. And right behind them was a giant floating tentacled alien they had brought from another dimension. Why not? It's an interdimensional space monster. Headmaster, please, Susie's right there. Squeezing all of his eyes shut, no small feat for a Teruvulian, he managed his side siphons vigorously, perhaps too vigorously. He was liable to get a callus, but it beat opening his eyes to see the face of whoever spiked his heart rate. You named the beast from dimension 22404. 22304. Quiet. You named it Susie. Well, a different voice from another corner of the room this time. Alien tentacled organism from 22304 sounded a bit of a mouthful, really. Tittering rippled through the small crowd of humans, quickly dying down as the headmaster snapped all of his eyes open to glare at the students. Several of them shrunk back slightly as he made eye contact. Oh, you think this is funny? The Wormhole Theory Lab is intended for advancements in theoretical physics, not to turn this institution into your own personal petting zoo. 3 months. You've only been here for 3 months, and you've already smuggled an interdimensional life form on campus and caused an unprecedented distress amongst the students and staff with your other antics. Do you know how many rules you've broken here? How many regulations you've infringed upon? How many ethical codes of conduct you've breached? None, actually. The headmaster siphons made a loud wheezing noise as he battled to keep his blood pressure under control. Wouldn't do to have a stroke now. Not before he could throttle the bookish-looking human who just decided to have the audacity to speak. Gaining a handle on himself, he barely managed to squeak out a retort. Excuse me? The human and 2 of his compatriots stepped forward holding a docupad. On it was the All Systems Science University Charter and Rules, Regulations, and Ethics. A hefty, dry, uncompromising tome that most students would never finish reading in their lifetimes, nor would most in their right mind want to. The very sight of it sent involuntary quivers down the headmaster's tentacles. Obscure sections of the charter were ripe fodder for extra credit assessments by sadistic professors, assessments that a few lucky students passed. Lucky students of which the headmaster in his younger days was decidedly not one of. The human opened up the charter and lazily flipped through the pages. There is nothing in here about the retrieving organisms from another dimension. There's plenty on good wormhole laboratory practices, potentially risking a singularity generation, warnings on not to attempt time travel, power requirements, mitigating risk of death and dismemberment, plenty on not carelessly introducing matter, energy, and organisms into other dimensions, but nothing specifically that you can't take an organism out. The headmaster scoffed. And you figured that out from a few pages, did you? Another human, one with a shock of red hair, shook her head. No, sir. We reviewed the charter for any references. Oh? And which parts? All of it. All of it? The headmaster's scathing retort died in his tongue as his brain caught up with what was said. You read all of it? The red-headed human shrugged. Well, not me alone. It was a team effort. Looking around, he saw the humans nodding and murmuring assent. Dry as hell, that was. I thought human law was boring. This was mind-numbing. Never again. I don't care how cool Susie is. Enough! The headmaster grabbed a docupad from the bookish human's hands, frantically cycling through it for any reference that he could use. Finding none, he looked up, shaking the pad at the bemused crowd of humans. I'm going to review this in detail. In great detail. Turning around, he stopped as a voice perked up. What happens to Susie? Slowly, turning around, he stared once again at the faces of his students, all sharing the same earnest pleading look, looking up to gaze at the giant interdimensional alien floating on the roof of the laboratory. He could have sworn, through the rows of teeth, she had a look of earnest as well. He took a deep breath and shook his head in frustration, feeling oddly pained at what he said next. You will need to send her back. We can't. And why not? A new lanky human stepped forward, brushing hair out of his eyes to peer at the headmaster. Section 2367, subsection 795, addendum 3. No foreign biological or organic material can be introduced to another dimension to minimize risk of contamination. The headmaster looked at him quizzically. The alien is from that dimension. The human hopped from one foot to the other in excitement, smiling only as someone with an ironclad defense could. True, but the microbes on her aren't. Not anymore. We checked, and neither is the food that we fed her. The human finally settled, beaming as he delivered his coup de grace. But even if you make us give her one of the mother of all baths, and wait for her to pass whatever food she ate, that will still take time, and there's no guarantee that she can be properly decontaminated safely, so... The headmaster felt his heart rate, restful from the past few minutes, shoot up again. Spinning around, he marched out the lab to his office, shooting a final response over his shoulder. I'll get back to you. 4 weeks later, the headmaster was fuming. Not only had these humans managed to somehow finagle their way into keeping their interdimensional beast through some technicality, but they had spurred him to scour the charter to completion, front to back for the first time in his life. Hopefully, the last as well. Their initial assessment and defense was legalistic. It was underhanded. But it was ironclad. They had broken no rule, so no disciplinary action could be taken for sneaking an interdimensional monster onto university grounds. Nor, as it seems, could actions be taken against numerous other antics the humans had decided to engage in for the simple fact that none of the previous administrators seemed to think anyone could be crazy enough to partake in such things. Well, no time for a correction like the present. Grabbing his donkey pad with an initial draft of the new rules and regulations, he paused to rudely waggle one of his tentacles at Susie, who was currently doing a loop-de-loops in the air over the campus to the awe of a few Pharasian and Vraxian students below. Collecting himself, he keyed into the university's campus-wide PA and began to speak. Good morning, students and staff. As many of you will know, a new species known as humanity has recently made contact with the wider galaxy and has sent some of their kind here to be educated in scientific knowledge of the wider universe. End of story. Story number 2. It worked a little too well, written by WegianWarrior. The captain was gritting her teeth as the shuttles descended through the ever-thickening atmosphere of the alien planet. Strong winds and surface-to-air artillery buffeted their sturdy craft as she reviewed the maps, the order of battle, the intelligence reports, and the battle plan. She was not happy about the battle plan. It was too much reliance on a single human battlecraft, and if it failed, it would be a bloodbath, and not in a good way either. And there was no way to ascertain if it would work until after they were on the ground and in contact. Ma'am? She looked up, flashed the young sergeant a confident smile that was only on the south side. 2 minutes until touchdown, ma'am. Very well, Sergeant. Ready to kick some ass? The sergeant looked at her for a heartbeat. Yes, ma'am, if we can find where these Xenos' asses are, ma'am. I've seen the hollows, ma'am, and they are either all ass or no ass, ma'am. Well, Sergeant, if the plan works... The sergeant hesitated before replying. If the plan works, ma'am, may I suggest you strap in, ma'am? 70 seconds into planetfall. It was some hours later. The captain was sitting in a crater trying to reorganize her forces for the push into the alien city so they could secure her main objective. Losses so far had been light, almost non-existent. The sergeant scurried over, one eye on the ridgeline and one on the communicator in his hand. Ma'am, the PSYOPS appears to have been successful, ma'am. Scouts report that almost all of the civilians already have or are in the process of abandoning the city, ma'am. The captain nodded. Good. Very good, Sergeant. By inducing them to flee, we have all but eliminated the danger of civilian casualties and the risk of collateral damage. The sergeant flinched slightly. I see, Sergeant. What detail have I missed? Or did you not tell me yet? Well, ma'am, not all of them ran away, ma'am. Not so much, ma'am. So there are still civilians in target area. I was really hoping to avoid that. No, ma'am. The city appears to be abandoned, ma'am. But, ma'am, we have an estimated 10% of the civilian population harassing the assault troops, ma'am. And I lost contact with the scouts 7 and 10 after their positions got overrun by civilians, ma'am. Harassing them, Sergeant. Civilians harassing Terran shock troops in full combat loadout. I would go so far as to say they're beleaguering them, ma'am. Making demands, ma'am. The captain stared at the sergeant for several seconds. Sergeant, what are you not telling me? Ma'am, you know what the PSYOPs aimed to do, ma'am? It was tailored to invoke a fear response in the local population, Sergeant, by playing at underlying culture mores and taboos, thus minimizing the risk of civilian casualties. Yes, ma'am. Tell me, Sergeant. Ma'am, most of them demand to be ravaged and pillaged, ma'am. They claim that we made promises, ma'am, and acting in what I presume is a rather promiscuous manner for their species, ma'am. The captain sighed as she rolled her eyes, catching a glint of sunlight reflecting off the command ship still in orbit. Sergeant, I do not have the time for this. I want you to have all the civilians rounded up as quickly as possible. Ma'am, gently, mind you. Troops are authorized to make any promises needed to make them come peacefully. Ma'am, any promises, ma'am. Any, even that kind. And send someone to rescue the scouts from whoever is happening to them. Yes, ma'am. And then, once we've got the civilians contained, ship them out to the PSYOPs team. They came up with the idea. They can deal with the fallout. Yes, ma'am. With a pleasure, ma'am. End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 peeps. Dragon Soup, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Red Panda 121, Leslie 517, Bushmaster 177, Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Sans the Skeleton, Light Jock, Dragzoon WRE, and Lord Asrigal. Thank you very much.